The idea that Missouri prepared for the wrong quarterback against Texas A&M is an excuse that doesn't even really make sense, and I'll explain why on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball, and it is time to officially reset our expectations for 2024, though, of course, technically everything is still on the table for Missouri. It just looks a little bit more unlikely than it did after this past Saturday's embarrassment against Texas A&M. So I want to talk about that coming up on the program. First, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I will say one thing, of course, that's been bandied about and discussed in Mizzou circles is that Missouri prepared for Marcel Reed all week at quarterback. And, of course, Connor Wigman warming up, then taking all of the snaps for the Aggies in College Station. Well, this was a big surprise to Missouri, apparently. And I'll admit it was a surprise to me as well. If you listen to my show, I'd been assuming all week, and I think that was kind of the conventional wisdom, is that Marcel Reed was going to start the game. So was Texas A&M maybe playing a little bit of possum there with Connor Wigman the previous week when he did not warm up in that Arkansas ball game? Who knows? And frankly, it doesn't matter because that whole excuse and line of thinking really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, at least in terms of letting Eli Drinkwitz off the hook. And you know what? If let's say they spent 100%, and by they I mean the Missouri Tigers and their coaching staff, especially on the defensive side of the ball, let's say they spent their entire week of preparation and the bye week as well, all of it, 100% of it, preparing for Marcel Reed as quarterback. Well, fine. As soon as the game starts, it's not like you have to throw out your entire defensive playbook in order to adjust there, especially on the front seven. If the idea was that Missouri and its front four was going to keep Marcel Reed in the pocket, sort of like it did with Thomas Castellanos and the Boston College Eagles a few weeks ago, well, obviously that doesn't make any sense with Connor Wigman. Now, Wigman did a good job of scrambling, but it was all stepping up in the pocket and basically running straight ahead. That's a little bit different than what Castellanos and Reed would have done to Missouri's defense. Different sort of challenge. And the gosh darns, the honest truth is, Missouri, if that's what if you got caught with your pants down by Connor Wigman, as if he's a type of player that you've never seen play college football in history, I'm sorry, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Tell your defensive ends to have a different type of assignment. And by the way, what you saw in the early parts of that ball game, the first half in particular, is Missouri would either play a man coverage or a zone coverage, but regardless, they were basically rushing 4 defensive linemen, and that was it. The lack of adjustment, the simple lack of adjustment of, hey, maybe call a blitz every once in a while. It's not as though that's something that just throws your entire game plan off of kilter. I just really don't understand that particular excuse whatsoever. And it does, by all accounts, Eli Drinkwitz leading up to the game was pretty dismissive of the idea that it was going to be anybody but Marcel Reed. And again, so was I. I was right there with Eli on that one. But the idea that, oh my God, it's a different quarterback and Missouri couldn't possibly adjust to that reality, that is no excuse whatsoever. These are not complicated adjustments that Missouri could have at least made in the game. Don't get me wrong. It would have been much more advantageous had Missouri prepared for Connor Wigman during that time. So good on the tricky Mike Elko, I suppose. But the point is, if you're Eli Drinkwitz, let's just focus on that. If you're Corey Batoon, the defensive coordinator, how does that just catch you with your pants down? Because based on everything I just laid out there, like what are the real adjustments that need to be made there? Like, okay, again, against Castellanos, sure, you're going to tell your front seven to sort of stay in your lanes and not overrush the quarterback. Well, fine. If you don't need to do that against Wigman, then don't do it. How hard is it to relay that information to your front seven? And again, just to call a blitz on occasion. We called one in the second half and it got home. I don't know how often Missouri blitzed, but it sure didn't seem like much. I'd like to see Missouri get back to being a little bit more aggressive with bringing extra defenders like it did last season. And while talking to the media today, Eli Drinkwitz said that Brady Cook is fully healthy. And while Eli Drinkwitz proved during 2022 he's not going to necessarily be wide open with his quarterback's state of health. Brady Cook had an injured shoulder suffered in week 2 that season that was surgically repaired in the offseason of 2022. He didn't let us in on that piece of information. But you know what I will say, Drinkwitz saying fully healthy, just that phrase in particular, leads me to believe that that's probably mostly true, that Cook is pretty darn close to as healthy as a football player is going to get here in the middle of the season. So to all the Missouri fans who think Cook looks a little bit different running the ball this season, well, you may be on to something. I don't think it's necessarily health-related from my vantage point. I think Cook has maybe been running a little bit too much side to side, east and west, as opposed to north and south, where I think that's his strength. When he's in the pocket, sees man coverage, and then sees a running lane, takes it, and just goes in a straight line for the most part, maybe does a little shimmy shake here to keep a guy off of balance. But running east and west doesn't seem to be Cook's strength, especially in the red zone and in short yardage at this point. But I will just say, for all the people, of course, when Missouri plays as poorly as it did in College Station on Saturday, there are going to be people who start looking at the backup quarterback situation. So what's the deal? Drew Pine. Should Missouri start thinking about that young man? Well, I think, quite honestly, I think anything is on the table in the next 3 weeks. So to me, it's obviously Cook's job for the UMass game. It's obviously Cook's job for the Auburn game, and almost 99% for the Alabama game as well. But after that game against the Crimson Tide, you've got another bye week and then 4 more games to finish your season. I think if Missouri, for whatever reason, hopefully the wheels aren't falling off of this team. Hopefully this is a moment where Missouri responds. As Eli Drinkwitz said, this one game is not going to define Missouri's season. It's how it responds. That's how Missouri's season is going to be defined. So if that's true, then what Missouri really, really needs is for everybody to be rowing in the same direction. Right now is not the time to be changing quarterbacks midstream. However, if this season falls off, if the wheels come off of this season, anything's on the table, I think. Once you get past Tuscaloosa, let's say the Tigers have maybe lost 2 of the next 3. I think UMass is about as close to a sure thing victory as you're going to get. But let's say Missouri doesn't look so hot in Amherst on Saturday, and they lose to Auburn and Alabama, maybe in unimpressive fashion, especially in Tuscaloosa. Well, I don't think anybody's starting position is a sure thing. I don't care what your NIL deal is. I don't care how much of a local celebrity you are. It doesn't matter to me. I think at that point, anything is on the table. Again, I don't even know how good Drew Pine is. I don't watch him in practice or anything like that. Him throwing a bunch of RPO slants in garbage time against Murray State and Buffalo isn't doing a lot to tell me exactly who he is as a player. So it's not even really about Drew Pine versus Brady Cook. It's just about Missouri's got to play better football. And if they look like what they look like against Texas A&M and we start sliding down the hill as opposed to going back up and actually proving something, well, now we really have something to prove. It's not just about media coverage anymore, which is something that Luther Burden seemed to be concerned about, in the weeks leading up to these games here. We can forget about that at this point. Let's prove to ourselves and the fan base that we're actually close to being as good as we thought we were in the preseason. And Eli Drinkwitz had a fair response, I thought, to the criticisms of Luther Burden's body language during the Texas A&M debacle on Saturday. I really did think it was a fair response in some ways, and yet it didn't really alleviate any of my concerns. So let's talk about that coming up in a second. But first, it's time for the Roy Player of the Week, and the Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose the specific athlete you want to support. You back the players you care about and in return get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. And this week, I'm going to highlight Luke Bauer. I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy and want you to join me by making a payment of as little as $10 when enough of us contribute. It's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send to Mizzou together. Our collective support helps keep him connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools and athletes with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how to enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play. Use code LOCKEDON when signing up and you're entered. Already on Roy, make a payment to any athlete's campaign and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. So those of you who watched the second segment of my post-game show of the Texas A&M game know I went on quite the animated rant against what I thought was just horrible leadership exhibited by Luther Burden, just not leading by example at all whatsoever. The antithesis of leadership, I thought it was. Well, asked about Luther Burden's body language this past Saturday, Drinkwitz basically brushed it off, saying that he hadn't heard anything about Luther Burden's poor body language. I know I wasn't the only fan that noticed, that's for darn sure, but apparently, according to Drinkwitz at least, nobody on the team seemed to have noticed or at least informed Eli during or after the game. But, quote, he says, "I hope they didn't have a camera on me the entire game." So to that point, obviously, your body language isn't going to be great when you're down 41-7, for example, or 31-0, that type of deal. Understandable. I get you're not going to be jumping around and smiling for the camera necessarily. I'm not expecting that. I just don't want to see, you can look annoyed. I'm okay with looking annoyed, which is what Eli Drinkwitz looked. But I didn't see him slumping into his chair and looking defeated. That was the type of body language that I didn't want to see. So to me, that's, again, understandable that we're not going to be having the most fun in the world or exuding joy and happiness and exuberance when we're getting our butts beat in football. Fine and dandy. I just don't want us to look like we've given up. I didn't think Drinkwitz looked like he gave up. I thought Luther Burden looked like he basically gave up when Missouri was down 10-0. By the way, not when it was 31-0, when it was 10-0, Luther Burden looked like he had emotionally given up. So to me, that's a huge learning moment for Burden and the entire team, unless Drinkwitz is telling the truth and it basically hasn't been addressed by the team at all. Well, it's hard to learn when you don't recognize the problem. That's for darn sure. But maybe it is something that Drinkwitz just wants to brush off in the media and something they've handled internally. If so, fair enough. But continuing on to this theme to some extent, Drinkwitz said, "I didn't see anything on film that told me that we had a lack of effort. I'm keenly aware of what to look for on that because that would tell me there's a deeper issue. And I would have to mostly agree. I didn't see any glaring examples of a lack of effort on Missouri's part. I saw a glaring lack of execution, no doubt about that. I think Drinkwitz said basically the same thing. But for all the people who said, well, Missouri quit, I don't know if they quit, but certainly Missouri never showed up for the game. That's fair. For whatever reason, Missouri looked totally unprepared for the game. They looked like, oh my God, we're facing a more of a pocket passer than the scrambling, more heavy Marcel Reed, as if that's something that has never happened in the history of football. I don't know. That's just a lame excuse. Not that Missouri's making that excuse. I'm just saying, even if you're thinking that way, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Not to redo that rant once again, but also I thought Corey Flagg kind of summed it up, really, when he was asked about why Missouri, when it got down early in some ball games, a couple of their earlier ball games, BC and Boston College and Vanderbilt, Flagg said, well, nothing against those other teams, but Texas A&M's just a better football team. Simply put, but obviously I think there's a lot of truth in that simple statement. At the end of the day, it's not a complete shocker that Missouri lost this game or anything like that. I'm just very surprised that Missouri got physically dominated. So how do we reset expectations here? I would say, well, first of all, is Missouri just much worse than we expected? Is Texas A&M much better than I thought coming into this week? I'd say no doubt that the Aggies look like a different team this week with Connor Wigman, also the best game they've played all year for sure. No question about that. But I think we have to be brutally honest and say that also Missouri is not as good as we expected either. That may be an obvious statement, but again, needs to be said out loud, I would say. Sure, you can say Vanderbilt beat Alabama. That makes Missouri's escape in that ball game look a little bit better on paper. But then again, Boston College, with their starting quarterback, lost to Virginia this past weekend, a pretty mediocre Cavalier ball club. Not impressive there for BC, unfortunately. So, again, how good was that win looking on paper too? Bottom line is Missouri starting poorly in all three, starting slowly, especially in all three of its power conference games, including a 14-3 deficit against Boston College. To me right now, this team is just looking like one that's lacking leadership. It looks like a team that bought in to the preseason hype quite a bit and feels like they can just show up against teams that they feel are inferior. Luther Burden III wanted more hype. Well, they got it leading into this week. There's no doubt about it. And unfortunately, we did not respond well to it. Missouri's offense is a lot better when we're ahead right now. That's another thing. Missouri, we're sort of designed around the run game, the offensive outside zone run game. And, well, when you get behind early, it's harder to lean on that particular play. It sure would be nice if Missouri would actually come out and get a lead against the Minutemen on this coming Saturday, wouldn't it? And speaking of UMass, the Tigers are 27.5-point favorites currently with my friends over at FanDuel. And coming up on the show, I want to talk about exactly what I want to see from the Tigers this week against UMass, what I think the winning formula is for Missouri coming up on the program and to finish the season. But first, let's talk about FanDuel, where NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats and view play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And by the way, speaking of resetting expectations, the Tigers were plus 120 to make the college football playoff entering this past Saturday. Well, they're now plus 360, so about 3-1, not quite 4-1 to make the playoff. not exactly impossible, right? That makes you feel slightly better. At least it made me feel slightly better. The season isn't over yet, by golly, but even when it is, you can have some fun over at FanDuel, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. It seemed like Missouri's focus early in the Texas A&M game offensively was to get the passing game going, especially downfield. And early, the returns were pretty promising. Of course, the first snap for the Tigers, Cook threw a beautiful back shoulder fade, got about 20 yards to Luther Burden, and even the aggressive fourth down call, which I liked. I think all of us thought that should have been a pass interference, of course. No need to really go over that again. But again, a good start there. But unfortunately, obviously the returns as the game went along, especially after that moment there in the first quarter or two, were not good. The passing game could not keep the Missouri offense moving the chains and much less scoring points. So to me, I would like to see this week against UMass, forget about trying to force the deep ball. We need to get back to running the football. Get that to being your base, the outside zone. Nate Noel, get in the ice tub. Get ready. Get ready. Whatever you got to do to be prepared to run the football. Him and Marcus Carroll, whoever needs to tote that rock. I think that's what Missouri needs to get back to this week. I'd love to see Noel get at least 20 carries and maybe another 10 or 15 for Carroll as well. I also think that particular strategy helps protect your quarterback and your offensive line, who are having their struggles right now in terms of not only keeping pressure off of Brady Cook, but as I pointed out in my previous episode, Cook has really struggled when under pressure this season, much more so than last season. While, of course, every quarterback is worse under pressure, Cook in particular this season, the numbers are just not pretty whatsoever. And speaking of numbers that aren't pretty, Cook was pressured at a 45% clip this past weekend against A&M. So nearly half the time Cook was dropping back to pass, he was under pressure. Contrast that to the other side of the football, where 5 hurries and 2 quarterback hits by the Tigers. So no sacks. I think 1 sack maybe on Wigman, but just 2 hits on him total, 5 hurries. That's not going to get it done. He basically looked comfortable for the entire game, save that 1 blitz that actually did get home on Wigman to my memory. Another thing I'd like to see offensively by Missouri, and really just if I'm an offensive coordinator in general, just across the sport at this point, I'm not calling read options anymore in short yardage situations in particular. Hey, if it's first down and 10 and I got plenty of room, there's plenty of space and there aren't as many people to read, then fine and dandy. But what I'm telling you now is those unblocked defenders on those read option plays are now blowing those plays up much more effectively, because instead of just being a simple read for the quarterback, they're now dipsy doing the quarterback a lot more and being much more aggressive in terms of here's what a quarterback's usually looking for on that play. If that unblocked defender, well, on the snap, if he basically stays at home, stays in a 2-point stance and doesn't dive toward the play, well, then you hand the ball off to the running back. Whereas if he does dive toward the play, then you as the quarterback, that's the moment, aha, I'm going to now keep the ball and run it to the outside. But after seeing these plays for 10 plus years now, think back to when Colin Kaepernick, for example, back in circa 2013, I would say when they made the Super Bowl and basically kind of blitzkrieged the Green Bay Packers in the league in general with this newfangled play called the read option. Well, that's not such a newfangled play anymore is the point. A lot of these guys who are now playing college football and have been defending the read option since they were little boys playing touch football and that type of deal. So seeing a read option not exactly blowing anybody's mind. And not only that, these defenders have seen it enough that they've realized, hey, if I dive toward the play, I'm going to trick the quarterback into thinking that I'm going for the running back, but I'm actually going to go for the quarterback, and I may just not only make the play on him for lost yardage, I may well just attack the mesh point and cause a fumble too. And the point is, especially in short yardage, a guy like Nick Scorton for the Aggies who did this to the Tigers this past weekend, well, not only is he explosive enough to make that play, but in short yardage, he's going to have more numbers near him, more men near the line of scrimmage, so therefore he's able to more easily take that risk. Now, that opens up a pass on the back end, which is why, again, I was kind of going, good. I kind of like the 4th and 2 aggression by Missouri in the passing game. I thought it worked. Unfortunately, we didn't get the result that we wanted in terms of a catch or a penalty. But regardless, the point is, read option plays. You want them in short yardage. You want them in the red zone. I'm telling you, those plays went from being a weapon in those areas to now I think it's almost too dangerous to run. Defenders are too smart. They've been too well schooled on that particular play over the years, in my opinion. And thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou. Going to be recording the weekly SEC Squad show this evening. That'll run on Thursday. And also, I will see you all on Wednesday with another edition of Locked On Mizzou.